Hi, this is StrategyCast, where smart marketers and bold business thinkers share the plays behind brand breakthroughs. I'm Lori Jones, President and CEO of Avasec Communications. What does it really take to build trust when you're introducing a disruptive product, entering a crowded market, or trying to stand out in an AI-driven search landscape? Today's episode breaks down how marketers can create transparency, earn credibility, and build customer loyalty that drives both growth and retention. You'll hear why storytelling matters more than ever, how trust impacts discoverability in an age of AI and answer engines, and why the brands winning today are the ones obsessing over the customer experience long after the sale. Today, I'm joined by Jennifer Reichenbacher, a marketing leader who helped shape category Disruptive for Keurig before bringing the same customer-first philosophy into fintech and payments at Stacks. Jennifer has spent her career helping brands earn trust in highly competitive markets by focusing on transparency, service, and measurable customer value.
A competitive edge starts with strategy, and strategy starts with knowing how to develop one. StrategyCast is a leading marketing podcast that serves up strategic insights, trends, and tips to help separate your business from the pack. Tune in weekly as host Lori Jones interviews bold marketing leaders who have priceless wisdom and are willing to share. Each episode explores cutting-edge approaches that have proven instrumental in transforming brands into industry trailblazers.
Welcome to the show, Jen.
Thank you, Lori, for having me. I'm excited for our discussion today.
I am too. My gosh, this is so meaty, right? And you've got such an incredible background with absolutely amazing brands. Before we dive into the amazing content, tell us a little bit about your journey.
You know, my journey, I always describe to people as just being very, very organic. I got out of school and kind of had an inkling that I wanted to go into marketing, but didn't really land there out of the gate. Was in a company in a completely different field and kind of fell into marketing. Literally, we realized we needed to have online representation. This was in the, call it early to mid 90s, and was one of three people tapped to become a marketing team.
Wow.
So we it was crazy. It was pre-digital.
That is such an early stage mindset, isn't it?
Yeah, I literally can remember being called into a conference room and him being like, all right, this is our new marketing team. Our CEO was very, very, very entrepreneurial, serial entrepreneur. And
I love it.
he said, well, you guys are going to be the marketing team. We're like, okay. And at the time we owned a magazine. So we were kind of doing a little bit of that, but building a website. I mean, our website was 5 pages in 1993 or 1994, whenever we launched it. It was, horrendously expensive, stock photography, et cetera. But, from there, I got the bug and I just loved it. And then just having the privilege to really be in marketing for the last 30 plus years, I've seen so much. And, AI is certainly keeping us all on our toes, but it's creating a whole new level of excitement, I think, around the marketing space and quite frankly, around business. I think so many people are looking at AI as it's its own disruptor, obviously. And I think people tend to have one extreme view. And I kind of look at it, I think more along the breadth of, hey, there's opportunity, but there's also efficiencies, and we're going to balance that in the end. So,
yeah. Reflecting on your days at Keurig, you were, it wasn't number 3, but you were number 23, I believe, at that.
It was.
And such a disruptive category at that time. What was it like, introducing that category breaker?
It's interesting because we started in B2B, which most people don't know. There was a life before the home unit was kind of introduced in 2004. I think the organization kind of got off the ground in 92. We were really building go-to-market when I got there in 1999, but we were disrupting the B2B space, which was kind of, our strategy was breakthrough, test it in B2B, different product, but same concept. And then use that kind of groundswell to do a soft launch of the home brewer. So we were working with office coffee distributors who had literally been selling coffee the same way for decades. It was, here's your pot, it's 3 cents a cup, that's what you're going to pay. It's horrible. But it's funny
Yeah.
because I think people looked at us and said, well, was Dunkin' Donuts a competitor? They were actually a stimuli. They were actually part of the reason. Our whole model was to look at the office coffee industry and really the home coffee industry.
Yeah.
We kind of looked at those in parallel. But it was like, hey, we're not going to necessarily compete with the people that are really diehard of they don't care with the coffee quality. But where we can get people is, hey, you're having to go out and spend $5, $3, $5 on a cup of coffee at Dunkin' or Pete's or Starbucks or whatever. That's costing the company money because you're leaving the office and you're certainly probably not punching in and out. But it's also costing you money. If we can deliver that same value proposition in office with a highly, bespoke quality cup of coffee, and it's consistent every time, how do you feel about that? And then really we were competing not necessarily with the home coffee space. We were really competing with people that were going out and buying coffee already. And there was essentially a cost savings. Because when you look at office coffee, back in that time or even today, if you're looking at those old, we called them fractional pack systems, that's costing about 3 cents a cup. We were coming in at like 28 to 38 cents a cup. So you're like, it's 1,000 times more expensive.
Exactly.
But 38 cents compared to $5 is still a discount. So it was very much demonstration based too. It was experiential. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this when we double click into the customer experience side, because this experience, without knowing it when I got into it, was really laid the foundation for me for the future and how I think about marketing.
Well, I tell you, and we're really glad to have you share that with us today. I feel very lucky. Reflecting on that for a minute, they weren't really measuring the number of pots of coffee that were thrown out because they got cold or because they got, tasted like tar too. So, I think it's very interesting. And one thing that in that situation is so incredibly difficult is developing trust. You're an unknown quantity. I mean, the company's not known, number one, but categorically, it's something brand new. And I think that is one of the most difficult positions to be in. As you reflect on that, what are the first things that marketers need to do to build credibility in that kind of a situation?
I think it really is about engaging with the customer and developing that trust. Trust sometimes can be assumed, and you can't do that. You have to get out there. I mean, we were lucky with Keurig because it was a demonstration based experience. So we got out there, we'd go out with our distributors and do the office demos, and we'd bring pastries or, a sweet treat in the afternoon, and we'd go do these demos, and we'd get people when the groundswell was happening for coffee. Quite frankly, a lot of it, and that's the reason we decided to catapult from there and do the home unit. We wanted to go with our core group, even though that core group was small. We wanted to go with the core group of users so that they could become raving fans. And we kind of had a very early on, we first launched in 2004. We relied on our raving fans and our consumer base to actually with a couponing system. So it was all about getting to our distributors, getting to our best locations, and then our best customers, the actual people drinking the coffee every day, became the first consumers and the first referrers long before we had any retail presence. So I think it's, I look back, I go, it's about establishing that trust that can come in a variety of different ways. But I think number one is engaging with your customers. Yeah. Number two is making sure that what you have is aligned with what the demand is and what the needs are. You're solving something, a real problem. And number three is make sure it works. If you're in a product or a service, it's got to work each and every time. Consistency is everything. Once that brewer would go down, we'd go take 3 steps back and then have to rebuild that relationship and rebuild that level of confidence.
Well, a couple reflections there. So first of all, the B2B audience was something very unique. And what you're really doing during the B2B marketing of that was developing the consumer raging fans. And a lot of people don't connect the dots there. It's why so much B2B marketing today is actually driven via consumer channels, because at the end of the day, when we leave the desk and we're watching The Diplomat at night, that streaming ad that the B2B audience receives is still highly, highly effective. So nonetheless, I just wanted to reflect on that. And something that we talked about in our pre-show, which I think is really important to bring forward here is, and you just touched on it, it doesn't matter what you think, it matters what the customers think and how they engage. Why? And I think a lot of brands just skip that. they don't, they're not engaging one-on-one like you did in the early days of Keurig with customers to listen and learn, quite frankly. They just skip that, which is a huge mistake. Why is that mindset so critical today?
I think otherwise, how do you know what you're doing is really making a difference?
Right.
I guess, like, to me, if you're not, if from my perspective, if your product or service isn't solving for a problem, a need, a want, what's your why? I
Right.
go back to
Right.
Simon Sinek, but it's catchy, but it's true. It's what's really your value?
Yeah.
And I think to understand that, I mean, I think so many companies, and I watch companies, new starts, um, existing companies expanding their brand platform. First of all, why why would someone trust you to expand your product offerings? But also, have you validated the fact that your customers actually want that? And
Yeah.
I don't think that ever stops. I think there's so many hypotheses that turn into never being validated because companies do just forge ahead, to your point, Lori, and they lose sight of it. It takes time, it takes money, and oftentimes
Yeah.
it's not part of the process that the executive team really wants to support. But that validation is so important, and it's ongoing. Can that evolve from a focus group to a customer advisory board, a partner advisory board, a survey, just general research? You've always got to have your finger on the pulse of what's going on in the markets you're serving. And some of that can come from, indirect, but I think so much of it is the value of, you know, having that direct relationship with your top customers.
Yeah. I agree. And it's interesting. Our listeners have heard me talk about this a lot, but the average person needs to interact with a brand 26 times to make
Mm,
a buying decision. And it does not matter if it's B2B, CPG or retail. That's the average. And that insight that you gain through the process that you really just spoke about is what shortens the trust gap. And when we shorten the
yes.
trust gap, the number of interactions needed to make a buying decision is drastically reduced. And you did that, with the taste tests that you did on the corners
Mm.
and stuff like that. It's one of the big ways that we can really increase revenue more quickly.
I think in the service industry, bringing that forward to the life I've had for now the last 17 years, which has been in fintech and payments specifically, it's a highly commoditized space. There's certainly a physicality to it. If you're doing card present payments, obviously you
Right.
get a hardware unit terminal. The advent of the internet really changed the dichotomy of how payments were brought to small business, especially. But there's still that element of and we learned so much more about this during the pandemic, is we're an essential service. I mean, I think people look at payments and go, oh, well, I could get it from this person, I could get it from this person, I could get it from this person. We help power global commerce. And, when I'm
Right.
talking to people on my team or talking to people about what we do, it's more than just putting the terminal there. I mean, granted, at Stacks, we're a full processor, but we have a responsibility financially and support wise. And we've got to make sure that our customers are receiving that value because they have customers that are, they're dependent on for their business.
Right.
The SMB especially, I think it's another market where it's a privilege to serve it because it's a complicated market. The US is rich with small business starts, even in a down market economy
Right.
compared to other areas in the world. And it's so much a part of the global economy, but it's hard. I mean, a lot of these owner operators are working in their business every day, not necessarily on it. So you've got to meet them where they are in the journey,
Yeah.
and you've got to make it easy. And transparency has been one thing that, honestly, it was one of the things that attracted me to Stacks, because Stacks, was founded in 2014, but started as a disruptor itself. So there was a common thread for me to
Right.
pull on from my days as far back as Keurig, 20 plus years ago. And it was, okay, wow, they disrupted with, what we still bring to market today for SMBs, which is pricing payments as a service. So it's a subscription. So it takes a lot of the mystery out of it. So you're not nickel and diming, but you still have to have the support side of that. And now, as you think about, AEO, which we're going to get into, your customer reviews and your raving fans are even more important than I would say they were 18 months ago. And I come
Yeah.
from the adage of, the Bain statistic from the early 2000s, it costs 6 to 7 times more to get a new customer versus retaining an existing one. But also, we all know as consumers, when something bad happens, you're more likely to tell 100 people. When something good happens, you're more likely to tell 5 or 10.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talk about transparency, trust, and service as a connected system. How do those three pillars specifically work together?
I think they're interdependent. I mean, I look at it almost like, HubSpot came out with a loop, and that's kind of the new marketing strategy. And I kind of pull that forward into other interpretations in my role. But, you kind of, without transparency, to me, it's very hard to achieve the trust. But if you're also not providing the service, the trust also erodes. And so much for the transparency being a part of it. So, I mean, you could argue that trust and service support, or transparency and service, support the trust. But I would say it's a continuous loop. And it doesn't, to something you mentioned earlier, Lori, that doesn't just end when they become a customer. If anything, for many businesses, that's the beginning of the relationship. That's the beginning of the engagement. So we want to make sure that we're continuously keeping our finger on the pulse. We're delivering, more than what's expected, and we need to know what's expected by having conversations with the customers. We're delighting the market. And, I think some people would say, how do you stay focused when you're doing that? Focus is key. I'm a big believer that you can't be everything to everyone. Keurig is a great example of that.
Right.
There were a lot of people where that wasn't our market. There were down market customers that were never going to move from even the B2B side, that it just didn't make sense. They had volume, they had velocity. It didn't matter. They didn't need a portion pack coffee system. At payments, in payments, I would say somewhat the same. Everyone needs payments, but they may not need the services and tools that we provide. But if someone values service, that's something that we care and pride ourselves on.
Well, and look at the impact Keurig made today. I mean, now you can get those pods with Dunkin' Donuts, with Starbucks. I mean, talk about a category. I mean, it's incredible.
It is funny. It's very funny to think about. When I started there, we had 8 flavors of coffee in one brand. When I left, we had about 90. And now I see, that this is kind of recent in the news about them. Is, that's a company that's worth about $18.3 billion, and now is splitting the beverage business from the coffee business and kind of going back to the roots. So it still kind of surprises me, because my window there was 6 years or 5 to 6 years, but it was just a great experience. I know. What a
window. And Stacks is lucky to have you. That's for sure.
And you bring forward a lot of the same things. You bring forward a lot of learnings.
It's the methodologies, it's the strategy, it's the thinking, it's the innovation. I mean, all of that is so important.
It is.
One thing that I think is interesting about what you're talking about is the invisible nature of fintech. It's similar with insurance and with service organizations. You've got a portal, and just everything is voodoo happening in the back end of it. And you just, hope that it works, right? And I think that is why your points on transparency are so important as a precursor to building that credibility and trust.
It is. I think it's kind of a misnomer. I think, you see credit card costs, and small businesses and all businesses pay for the service that's provided to accept credit cards. But there's a lot of pieces to that pie, especially in the US.
Right.
It's a much more kind of layered market and layered process. And a lot of things that people just don't understand or don't know. Are we going to bring forward every detail? No, but it's really important to make sure that, especially on the service side of the industry, that you're educating your customers along the way. And, that's one of the ways that I found, certainly in the fintech space, that we can make sure that, it can help be one of those foundational pillars to building trust through transparency. Is also, it's not just having clear pricing, having core values and staying to those. A lot of it's about helping to educate. And I said it earlier, meeting your customer where they are in their journey.
Yeah, I love that. Fast forward, even with your career at Stacks, it's changed. Technology has changed it so much. And if we take a look at where even, SEO and SEM was 5 years ago and where AEO is moving it today, it truly is remarkable. And with 90% of first brand interactions starting online, it is so important that AEO and SEO strategy really be in play. You've said we're moving from traditional SEO into this answer engine optimization. What does that shift mean for marketers?
I think this year, especially, it's going to be a little bit of a circus act in terms of balancing, because you started this year, a lot of companies, every company kind of manages its quote unquote testing budget a little bit differently. And typically, if you have a digital budget, it's directly tied to ROI.
Right.
There's a pro forma that sits behind it. There's not a lot of like extraneous dollars that you can use to test in. We've been tracking AEO generated leads organically for probably the past 6-7 months, maybe a little bit longer. So we've had our finger on the pulse of this. I think it's still undefined, but if marketers aren't looking at this and planning for this, they're going to be far behind. I would say that if you haven't started that initiative now, you're probably a little bit behind, but with AI, you might be able to catch up, I guess. And I think it reminds me, as I think about it, back to when SEO first came out, because people felt that it was helping kind of sort through the noise on the web.
Yeah.
The web was also a much smaller universe in the early 2000s than it is now.
Right.
So I look at AEO. Personally, I'm excited for it. I think it brings together some of the foundational elements of marketing that I've always really honed in on, content being one of them.
Right.
But we were just talking about service and support. The fact that LLMs are looking at not just your web content, not just aggregators, but review platforms, earned media, offline materials that are more like knowledge bases, training. We just talked about education. They're looking at a more holistic picture, because it really is someone's more active in the buying process. So I expect the funnel to get smaller. I expect it to get more narrow,
right,
in general, more flat, I should say. But I think you'll see, and we're already starting to see this, the conversions from MQL to SQL to one customer, new customer, are going to look a lot different.
Yeah.
In terms of, I've heard numbers expect, some of the things I've read is expect half as many, maybe less MQLs, but expect 2x the closed ones from those MQLs, because it's a more active search versus a passive search. But what's going into that, you've got to be looking at long form content. I think people look at AI and think, oh, great, I can, spam more stuff onto the web, spam more stuff onto social. That makes me a little nervous. I think you still have to make sure that what you're putting out there is quality. It's meaningful, and where it can, it has a trust anchor. And a trust anchor to me would be a review, a customer case study, validation, success metric, et cetera.
Yeah. I want to talk about storytelling in a minute. And this is a bit of a just tactical adjunct here. And question, out of curiosity, we are seeing, whether it's Perplexity, Claude, Chat, we're seeing a bit of bias with AEO when we're searching for our own clients within our own systems. Are you seeing that as well? And what are you doing to overcome it?
I think if you're in your kind of quote unquote walled garden, I think you're going to, especially if you're using tenants, AI tenants that are connected to your systems. Yeah. So I think that's part of the value of AI is it's learning your preferences. So it's already knowing that you may not be a buying customer, but you're a consultant, you're consulting with that firm to help them. So we're looking at it. I mean, I would say that that's the same. The parallel for me that I would draw loosely is when your own team's looking at Google, and looking at sponsored content and thinking it's, not sponsored and clicking on it, and they're getting an experience that's different than what they would get if they were just going to the organic. I think it's also important that companies start to, figure that out. I mean, right now the pilots are out in terms of, I guess, agentic engine management or monetization, AEM. We're just starting to see some of the suggested content. What I've seen personally has been hyper focused on me, more some of the top brands, some of which I use highly. Again, in my gem, all the Gemini stuff that I do, highly focused
Right.
on me as a B2B marketer, not
Right.
me as a consumer, because that's how I'm using gem. So that relativity is coming in. But we've just started now to get our kind of ad placement started for ChatGPT. And I think, it's only a matter of time. What I'm hoping doesn't happen is I'm hoping that the advertising and the monetization element of AEO doesn't ruin it
Yeah.
and doesn't create a Times Square experience, doesn't delineate the relevancy, the time, and the power of AI from a search and from an engine optimization to be an answer machine as opposed to, being an ad platform.
Yeah. And choosing, the storytelling pieces as a part of that is absolutely critical. Are you seeing a change, in, the last 5 years on not just the types of pieces and not necessarily the content, but what about frequency? What about, how is AI picking it up differently than the previous search engines did?
I think if you have the right content, it's picking it up in a more relevant, meaningful way. I think it still depends on your brand reputation
Right.
overall, because it's not just one thing. As we were talking about, LLMs are looking at a variety of things. So if you have horrible reviews and you've got a great case study, those may nullify one another in
Yeah.
terms of how you're being kind of ranked and presented to people looking for embedded payments, for example. So you do need to have everything. But I do think that I think a lot of people look at AI as, hey, I can feed it this and, have it write my stories. You know, we had a chief AI officer who just retired. He actually just exited last week. And his mindset since coming into Stacks is something that I will carry with me for a while until AI, I guess, proves me wrong, which is AI assisted, human approved. It still needs to be part
Absolutely.
of
Yeah.
these content pieces, and your social posts still need to be part of your integrated marketing strategy. They still need to have relevance and be part of something bigger. Just firing off a bunch of social media posts or firing up a bunch of blogs is not going to help in an LLM search
No.
from a relevancy
Yeah.
in a responsibility perspective. So I think it's a balance to answer your question, Lori. I think AI gives us the capability of accelerating some of those things. And I look at it as taking away some of the more monotonous things. But when I put it something in AI, for example, to me, it's generating a draft that then I'm going to review. And yes, it's
Absolutely.
learning more of my personality. You also need to know, don't give up and pull it out of AI and start working on it independently without going back. Otherwise, you're not training the models and you're not going to get the long-term value of the experience of working with AI. So it is a balance. If you don't spend the time doing the prompts and you just give up and bifurcate it out, it's doing one part of the function, but it's not getting smarter over time. Maybe you don't want that. But certainly for me, I find that, it's a little laborious sometimes because it's so tempting to pull it out and just finish it yourself. But going back and using it as a retraining exercise, the same way you would with a human being.
Yeah.
I look at AI like a set of interns that we
Yeah.
have.
Absolutely.
You know,
Yeah, and I find myself actually toggling back and forth with the same topic between AI systems. A lot of times
same.
I might work on something in ChatGPT and then transfer it to Claude to have him assess it. So, I mean,
It is.
it's really very, very interesting on how all that works. You bring up human approved, which I love that concept so much. And that really ties into human centricity and that customer experience, which you've got such an incredible background on, which I think is very, very difficult in SaaS solutions. What are you doing there to really make sure that the customer experience is where it needs to be from a differentiation and distinction standpoint?
I mean, I think for us, it's been at the core of Stack since its inception as that merchant, and our founders felt very strong about that, and I appreciate that. That's an attractive thing for me when I joined the company 3 years ago. But now those expectations are heightened. I think one example is, you know, yes, we need to be using AI, but we also need to make sure that from a support perspective, we're meeting customers where they are. You've got to be making sure that you have multiple touch points, but also multiple ways for them to contact you. I watch companies go all in on a chat and they try to force everybody there. I mean, listen, we've all called a cable company or an insurance agency. I mean, you need to be like one of the coders for IBM to get out of that phone tree. Are you kidding me? That phone system is so deep because you can't get out of it because they just want you to automate everything. That's great if that's that person's preferred preference, but we're looking at AI and we're looking at our experiences over, hey, do you want to email? Do you want to call? We still provide US-based support.
Right.
Do you want to chat? Are you more of a self-service person? How can we make sure that we've got the right mediums and the right resources to help all of our customers at any time that they need support? So I think that's a piece of it. I think also it's, as I said earlier, it's having these conversations. We do a lot of work, kind of bringing this forward from Keurig is something I brought into fintech. Is all the fintech companies I've worked for have had multiple channels. Yes, we do a lot with SMB, and that's highly transactional. It's high volume, but we also do a lot with embedded payments partners or resellers, and making sure that we're also becoming an extension of them, and we're providing them with education that they can use for their merchants as well as they can use internally. So it's such an interesting market because everyone looks at marketing, and I think now more than ever I hear, well, they were too much on brand. We need more performance. They did too much this, and everyone looks at the budget and says, what's the ROI? What's your CAC? What's your LTV to CAC? And I appreciate that. I'm a hugely data-driven person, but you can't forget that some of it is about, when we work with an embedded payments partner, how can we help them drive adoption? Because signing a partner and getting them to integrate Stacks payments as their payments on their SaaS, really important and exciting, but they're not experts in payments. So how can we, I look at it like an agency relationship. Something you're intimately familiar with is when I look at our agency relationships as a marketing lead, I always consider them an extension of our marketing team.
They have to
On
be.
the payment side, I want my channel marketing team to be an extension of the payments organization within our SaaS partners.
Well, and I think it's so this intersection between brand and GTM is something that we've been talking about for a very, very long time. And I don't think that you can have a strong go-to-market motion without a strong brand, especially when we're talking about trust and the credibility that is so important there. You can't fake trust in an AI-driven community.
I'd argue that you couldn't fake it in a non-AI, but certainly a lot of companies have tried. I think when we were doing our pre-show conversation, I mentioned, the brand is a vessel, but you have to pour meaning into it. And part of that meaning is not just telling people who you are, it's showing people what you do. And the biggest piece of that is your customer testimonials and your customer engagement, reviews, case studies, et cetera. Like everyone can go out, add a brand, create a brand, and chest pound and say, I'm great at this. There's so many false claims. We all see it. Plus now, probably more on the B2C side, but I see it on the B2B side. People are just over-marketed. Everyone's looking for the easy route of influencer marketing. And I've gotten to a point personally where the trust is broken because everything I see, someone that I respect, post on social media says paid advertisement at the bottom. So I think that's a tricky situation. And you've got to go back. To me, it's almost like this is going back to your roots of what are the things that make it is. Authenticity is key today. Absolutely. That A could stand for not agentic. It could stand for authenticity or not answer. And I think that, hopefully AEO is going to bring more companies back to authenticity or realism, because it's not something you just throw more money at. You've got to, sometimes this can be messy. It's hard to take a company that has a bad reputation and make it a good reputation. Sometimes rebranding is the right,
Yeah.
is the right move. It's the right pivot. But rebranding without changing who the company is or how the company behaves is, as they say, lipstick on a pig.
Well, it is, and that's where you can't fake authenticity.
No.
You cannot fake it, because you're going to hear about it if it's not believable, and then trust is never going to happen. It's another thing that you just touched on, which I think is very, very important, is that when mistakes do happen, brands don't own them. People don't own
Just
them.
own it.
And
Just own it.
exactly. It's the number one reason why most CEOs are fired, by the way, let alone marketing teams, is because they don't own the mistake that they made in the market. They push it aside. They, like you said, try to hide it. And you must be authentically, owned and in that kind of a situation, and make sure that, even if it's not public, that, we've got a client right now that has a big issue with a product enhancement, physical product, software element, big issue with it. We're going back in and having to reverse time with 1,000 customers and own the mistake that they made instead of pushing it aside and hoping that nobody noticed. It's a big issue now. It's bigger today than it was when the issue started 5 years ago because they didn't own it at the time.
If you let a fire burn, it'll burn out of control.
Right.
And, as humans, I think we forget that there's humility is still a big part of the trust and respect you build with brands that you use.
Right.
And when, a car manufacturer, for example, sends a recall notice, yes, they're legally required to do that.
Right.
But I appreciate when there's extra care and service attached to that experience. I think that it's hard for companies to spend millions of dollars in some cases and say, oops,
Yeah.
that didn't come out the way we thought. But mistakes happen. And the only way you learn from those mistakes is to surface them and fix them.
Right.
And I think customers, in the end, if you have the right customers and you're doing the right work, the majority of your customers will appreciate it. They'll forgive you quicker and they'll stay with you because they'll respect the fact that you were humble enough to say, hey, we're taking a mea culpa.
Yeah.
We didn't, you're not going to hit everything out of the ballpark. You're just not. I mean,
No.
that's just, that's just the way that it goes. I mean, we've all had misses. I mean, let's not go back to New Coke.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone has a miss here and there.
Yeah.
And that made Coca-Cola better. I think in the end, I think it made it a stronger company.
Yeah.
I think it also set the bar for the beverage industry.
Yeah.
I mean, we live in a world of just being so over-indexed with choice and optionality. And we also live in a world where there's nothing secret.
Yeah.
I mean, everything's on video.
Yeah.
Everything's online. I always say to people, hey, before we write something, let's, make sure that it makes sense. Let's assume that if you're writing a crisis communications piece, it's going to end up on Reddit and it's going to end up copied. It's going to end up on LinkedIn. Someone's going to see it and spam you. It's how you react to that that's really, really important. And I think, sometimes that's hard because people want to shy away from it. They want to hide from it. They want to bury it and make it disappear. But those fires will continue to burn.
Yeah.
We can't.
No, it can't be
can't.
done. Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Well, speaking about choice, I wish we had the choice to speak a little bit longer today because this has been so enjoyable. But we're out
This
of
has been a
time.
blast.
What is the best way for our audience to get in contact with you?
Honestly, follow me on LinkedIn, Jen Reichenbacher, and I have some other social media accounts, but LinkedIn is kind of the place to be for B2B in my mind. So it's a great way to connect. And Lori, this is such a pleasure. Thank you so much for hosting today. I've so enjoyed this conversation. I love talking about customer centricity and, talking about authenticity. That's where it starts. So,
well, I tell you, there's no doubt about that. And at Avocet, we believe that trust and authenticity is one of the most valuable assets a brand can build. It isn't created through slogans or campaigns alone. It's earned through transparency, consistency, and delivering value at every stage of the customer value. The brands that will win tomorrow will be the ones that obsess over customer experience today. Thanks again for joining us on StrategyCast, Jen. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Lori.
That's a wrap. Thanks for joining us on today's show. We hope your strategic brains are spinning with new ideas and bold inspiration that will elevate your strategies and marketing know-how.